Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we are going to be talking about the real estate cycles. These include the expansion phase, the hypersupply phase, the recession phase, and the recovery phase. So, let's get into it. Okay, the first phase is the expansion phase. So, the expansion phase occurs when occupancy rates exceed the average in the city. So, for example, if the occupancy rate is normally 92%, for example, then that city enters the expansion phase once the occupancy rate exceeds 92%, right? Meaning that more than 92% of the places available for housing are occupied by people, right? This also means that prices and demand for rentals are climbing, right? More and more people are deciding to enter this housing market. And so, therefore, because there's more people and more demand, the prices are also higher, right? If we just think of the very basic supply and demand, if there's more demand, that drives prices up because there's more people looking, there's more competition. And so, people are going to need to bid higher in order to get the real estate that they would like to get in a lot of cases. Whereas if there's not a lot of demand, not a lot of people looking, then it's the opposite, right? Prices aren't as high and people don't need to bid as high in order to get the deals that they would like to get. So it is more difficult to enter the real estate market or purchase a new property during this phase. It's wonderful to have properties during this phase, right? Because rents are up and there's high demand, so you're more likely to be able to find quality tenants faster, which is fantastic. So it's easier to rent out already purchased properties during this phase, which is great. However, it's more difficult to enter the real estate market or get a new property because since the price and demand is higher, that also pushes more real estate investors to want to get in on that, to say, okay, let's buy a new place, right? Let's put an offer in for a new place that we can then rent out and make money from because prices and demand are up, right? There's going to be people wanting to rent out that space. Okay. Also, builders are likely to start new construction during this phase because of increased demand, right? Because now that more renters are wanting to get in on this, therefore real estate investors are going to say, okay, let's buy somewhere, right? Let's buy a new rental place that we can rent out. The market's going great, things are going well, it's awesome, and so then builders are going to say, okay, people want to buy and they're willing to pay more for things. Let's start new construction so that people can buy it up from us, right? So real estate investors can buy it, or people who are wanting to own their own home can buy it, so that they can then rent it out, so that the renters can get what they need, which is a place to live, right? So that's kind of how it works. All of these things go hand in hand, right? There's a reason for why all of these are the case. Okay, let's move on to the hypersupply phase, which comes after this phase. And by the way, each phase lasts a few years. It's not like each phase comes and goes quickly. Each phase lasts a few years generally. Okay, so in the hypersupply phase, more new construction is being built. More of these projects are finished because, when we start building new construction, it doesn't just finish overnight. It takes years to build new construction projects, right? And so for that reason, the occupancy rate kind of lowers again because now there's more supply than we need, right? Because we kind of overshot a bit and we have a bit more supply than we need, perhaps. And so for that reason, occupancy rates lower and there's lower demand, and also sometimes overall rent prices are lower, right? And so if there's new tenants coming in, to rent out our space, they may not have to pay as much money as they would have had to pay during the expansion phase because there was a lot more demand for rentals then. There were a lot more options and people wanting to get them, and so landlords may have to lower their prices in order to get good quality tenants, depending on the situation with the hypersupply phase. And of course, with an increased supply in the rental market, renters are able to then negotiate for better deals. Whereas, before when we had the expansion phase, it would be hard to negotiate for better deals, right? Because anyone negotiating and asking for a lower rate is probably not going to be chosen when there's, 10 other applications of people offering the full price, the full rent price, who are also good candidates as well, right? So no one's going to choose, someone who's only willing to pay a lower offer than was originally advertised in that case. But in this case, that could be the case, right? The tenant could end up negotiating and getting a better deal. Okay. The next one is the recession phase. In the recession phase, occupancy rates fall below the average rate. Other factors such as increased interest rates and increased unemployment rates are also going to play a role, right? And so basically, since less people are going to work, right, more people are going to move to areas that are less expensive, right? Maybe moving out of the big city. If they don't work in the big city, there's not really, or there's less people being employed in the big city. Less people are moving to the big cities and paying a higher price because normally big cities cost more. Also, there's more houses on the market with less demand for them. So it is easier to make a purchase during this phase, if assuming you do have the cash to be able to make that purchase, right? If you have that money available, then you're good to go and to do that. And it's going to be easier to get a better deal than in the other phases when a whole bunch of people are doing that, right? Because people oftentimes they look at finance in terms of these days. These days, people don't have as much faith in the economy, even though for many years, we've seen all these cycles over and over, right? Eventually, it'll be good again, right? Eventually, we'll get back to that expansion phase and we'll recover from all of this. However, right now during the recession phase, it feels stressful, right? We have increased interest rates, which means mortgage payments are higher for homeowners and landlords. And there's less people who are employed, which means people aren't having the income to afford higher rents, right? So that's going to play a role as well. More people are trying to sell their homes and they're selling for less because the interest rates are up. And so it's harder to make, the payments are going to be higher than they would be otherwise. So to compensate for that, there's less it's going to need to cost less to buy a new property to reflect that, right? Now that said, interest rates are up and rent prices are down, and there is less demand for the rent, for places to rent as well. Okay, so after the recession phase comes the recovery phase, and this is where the unemployment rates and interest rates start to decrease. So more people are going back to work, the interest rates are decreasing again, and so that's kind of taking the heat off of landlords and homeowners in terms of how much they're having to pay each month. And also the demand for housing that increases, right? People are moving back to the big city, for example, because they got a job in the big city and they're now able to afford it because they have this new great job and things are good. Rent prices are also going to follow this, right? Just, given that the demand for the housing increases, rent prices are going to follow that and they're also going to be up, right? It's harder for a tenant to negotiate for a better deal if there's 5 other people standing in line also wanting to rent that place and willing to pay the full price for it, right? They're going to have to offer the full price for it if they want a shot in getting it, right? Right? Because just in general, the demand for more rental places pushes competition up, which also pushes prices up, right? Because of that, because people continue this, occupancy rates start to increase, but they have not yet surpassed the average, right? Because when they do surpass the average, that means that we are in the next phase. We're in the expansion phase once they've surpassed the average, but they are recovering, right? They're going up from where they were during the recession phase. So that's important. Also, real estate investors now have more confidence in the economy and they start to look into buying more real estate. And also, construction companies, they also have more faith in the economy for that reason as well, and know that real estate investors are going to be looking for their next place to get. And so they're now going to start looking into getting permits and building new construction as well for those same reasons, right? Because if there's starting to be more demand, what happens? Well, that means that people are going to want to increase the supply, right? Real estate investors see a good opportunity to increase the supply in order to get people what they need, right? Which is a place to live, to rent that out. They see that as that's an opportunity for them to do that, to provide people with something they need. And so therefore the construction workers, they're going to say the same thing. They're going to say, okay, more people are looking to buy a house either for themselves or to rent out or whatever the case may be. And so they're going to then build that to meet the demand that the landlords and future homeowners would like to have, right? Which is based on the people who would like to rent. And so they're going to then do that, right? So it all kind of comes together, right? The construction companies are less likely to build new things during a time when there's already lots of properties on the market and it's hard to sell properties. But during times when things are good, when it's easier to sell properties, then more people are going to make properties, right? And then, of course, inevitably, The next phase comes back, right? We go back to the expansion phase, right? Things are going great, they're expanding, etc. More builders are building, more real estate investors are, bidding higher to buy new properties. Then we go back to the hypersupply phase where eventually we have more supply than we really need, and there's lower demand, and tenants negotiate for better deals. Then we have our recession where we have low occupancy rates again, we have high interest rates, more people unemployed than normal, all that kind of stuff. And then we start to recover. We start to see people being able to go back to work, rent prices increase, housing prices increase, all that kind of stuff increases, and then we decide to build new construction, so then we can go back to the expansion phase. So that's basically that, right? That's kind of how it works. Now, it does take over a decade for all of these phases to happen. In general, these phases happen over years, right? Not over just a few days or months. So, what is the point of learning about these phases and understanding them? Basically, real estate prices overall do grow over time. So, as long as the investments you have are sustainable, there's no need to time the market. And also, as long as you're keeping a house that you buy for at least a few years. Obviously, it's maybe not the best financial decision to just keep a house for a short time, because if you keep it for a short time, it might go up in value, it might not go up in value, right? You never know. It depends what stage that it's bought at and what stage you're selling it at. However, if you're selling after 10 years, then regardless of which phases it is, the real estate is going to go up in value over time, right? But if that's not the reason, right? If it's not about timing the market and waiting for the next recession phase to buy your next property, then why do we have to learn about this? Basically, understanding the phases that the market is in, it can help you prepare for what's coming next. So if I've come to the conclusion, for example, that right now we just started the recession phase, for example, I could say, okay, in the next few years, we're eventually going to get to the recovery phase, and then we're going to get to this next phase, the expansion phase, and then the hyper supply phase, and so on, right? We're going to go through all these phases, so we'll be able to understand what's to come in the next few years, right? So if we can understand what's going to come next, and we know, and we also understand this cycle of, things, there's going to be recessions and then things do improve, then we're less worried in the short term about, oh no, like things aren't going well these days, right? Will it be like this forever? Well, no, recessions aren't going to last forever. They might last for a couple of years or a few years, but they're not going to last forever. In 5 years, whatever recession we're going through at any given time, 5 years from then, at that point, the economy will likely be out of that recession and into the next phase, or into the phase after that, even, depending, right? And so it's important to understand that these phases continue to repeat themselves over and over. And just because things aren't looking as good right now, that's okay. And there's things we can also do to mitigate that with the recession phase. So, for example, what can we do to change up our marketing strategy? Are there extra services or features we can offer to make our property stand out? Could we change our target market, or something like that? Would that be a potential option? Anything like that we can kind of think of it to be creative in the short term, to get us back to the times when things are good, right? When we are back in the expansion phase, right? And so there we go. There we go. All right, but good work today, everyone, and I'll see you next day. Bye, everyone.